Ready and rolling. All right, osteocalcin. So we did a podcast with Richard on osteocalcin, and as I said, I was going to go into more details as to what osteocalcin is on the Julian's Corner podcast. It's obviously not a bit, just not a little bit on the technical side with a lot of big words. What I like with the Julian's Corner podcast format like this on Kajabi is I can list the papers that talk about all those that I'm usually quoting or talking about. So under you'll see at least 3 papers on osteocalcin. It is actually something fairly recent. We're talking less than 10 years, I think. And that is, in my opinion, changing the way we look at the sympathetic nervous system. I think one of the main issues that we see with the sympathetic nervous system is that there is not a proper explanation of the difference between acute stress and chronic stress. One of the things we're going to see through looking at osteocalcin precisely is that acute stress is on the sympathetic side, whereas chronic stress is on the parasympathetic side. And I know I'm going against what a lot of people have said on this, but let me explain to you why. If we look at the difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic, what is really the context? What is the purpose of each? If you look at the sympathetic, it's energy spent on the outside, toward the outside world, right? That's what they call the fight and flight mode. But it's really that. It's really having the energy being produced, spent on dealing with the world. The parasympathetic side is actually energy spent on the inside, on making things work inside. That's where the freeze mode is. A lot of time is so let's talk about the freeze mode because you'll understand better what I mean by that. What is the freeze mode? It's playing dead. Now, why do you play dead? It can be 2 reasons. First is you have assessed the threat coming at you, and you realize that you cannot win that fight. That most likely, if you fight, you're going to die. So, being a prediction model, right, the body is like, all right, chances are I have a very, 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 very low chance of winning this fight. Let's say a grizzly bear comes at you. It is better to play dead because then you do not display violence, a threat to the grizzly bear, and hopefully it doesn't kill you. Even if you fight it, then you're sure to die. So in that case, playing dead is a valid defense mechanism, right? So when that happens, I need to have a signal saying, no, don't fight. Stop the sympathetic for taking over, the posturing, going like, well, I'm going to go fight anyway, since you're going to die, right? And spend the energy toward the inside, toward the freeze mode, right? To keep you alive, even though you're not fighting. Or it can be the other part, which means you start a fight and you get your ass whooped so bad, you have spent so much energy that now at this stage, spending more energy puts the body at risk. Right? Or you can have a combination of both, obviously. Right? But at some point, if you spend too much energy, the body will have to shut down because you are putting at risk cognition and who knows, maybe vital function of the human. So in that sense, the body will stop you from doing anything else. But when you're that exhausted, the body still needs to function on the inside. It still needs to produce lactate toward inflammation, toward healing faster, for example. It still needs to keep your heart rate at a certain level because you just fought. There are a certain number of steps that needs to be taken. Gluconeogenesis has to pump up in order to get that extra lactate to turning back into glucose so it can be pumped back into lactate. And ATP production being created. There's a number of steps that need to be taken into consideration. And it's actually a huge amount of energy that needs to be spent toward healing, toward doing stuff like that, undoing the damage that the fight created, right? And sometimes as fast as possible. So it can be just because it's turned toward the inside doesn't mean it's a low level of energy. And that's a problem the way we look at parasympathetic. When we say rest and digest, we think it's a low level of energy state. That is not true. You can be in a very high level energy state and still be on the parasympathetic. For example, like if you just had a fight and you have injuries, inflammations everywhere, like you've spent too much of energy, just pumping through gluconeogenesis, the extra lactate back into glucose, having the healing factor, the anti-inflammatory factor, being able to get your heart rate under control, that's a parasympathetic job. All this requires very, very, very high level of energy, right? So you can see that it's not a matter of a lot of energy or not a lot of energy, it's a matter of outside world versus inside world. So what's very interesting in this is that adrenaline, cortisol, all those what are called glucocorticoids, hormones, so more steroid-based, are actually in charge of that. So that means I would put cortisol, for example, at least adrenaline, that would put it in the parasympathetic side, not a sympathetic agent, which is a completely new way of looking at things. How do we know we're right? Because, for example, in a stressful response, you can take the adrenaline glands of usually a mouse. The mice always get it. But we've seen that in humans that had accidents where the adrenaline glands were shot, and they still have a stress response. That is the same as someone who has an adrenal gland. So that means that, for example, some of the stress hormones produced by adrenal glands are not responsible for the sympathetic reaction, what is called the acute stress response, ASR. So chronic, though, then you see cortisol, you see adrenaline, you see all this. So there's a difference between acute stress and chronic stress. Chronic stress is more parasympathetic, acute stress is more toward the sympathetic function. So that would matter a lot when you look at that. Because then you can go into acute, chronic stress is chronic inflammation, things like this. I've seen that overly sympathetic action, it might not be that simple. At least fight versus flight. There's an entire thing there between the difference between fight and flight and the difference between acute and chronic stress. All this is not quite that simple. And putting adrenaline simply as a sympathetic agent is incorrect, at least for adrenaline. So knowing that, there's the date is on the papers, but some evolutionary biologists started to look at that. On top of it, the glucocorticoids. So glucocorticoids come from glucose, cortex, and steroid. So the idea is those agents, so adrenaline, cortisol, and everything, will have a huge impact on the homeostasis of glucose. Because we need certain glucose to be high, because glucose will produce lactate through glycolysis, right? But the issue with them is they can sometimes take hours to take action. Right, but that's a problem when you need an acute sympathetic response when the bear is coming. You have 2 seconds, not 2 hours. So they were like, all right, so it is less likely then that the glucocorticoids are in charge of the acute stress response. So we're like, all right, so if it's not the glucocorticoids, then what is it? So if it's not the steroid-based, then it's going to be a peptide hormone. So usually an endocrine organ, and bones are considered endocrine organ. It's an organ that has an action at a distance through steroid or peptide hormone. So growth hormone is a peptide, for example. The other ones are steroids. Doesn't matter, but it's just the composition of them. So the idea was like, all right, so if it's not going to be a steroid, then let's look at a peptide. And the one that popped out was the peptide hormone produced by bones called osteocalcin. The reason they looked at bones is if you look evolutionarily speaking, we need evolution gave us bones to do more than just support the structure. Like we have the bones, they protect the heart, right? So evolutionarily speaking, we have used bones to protect ourselves and allow us to do a better type of fighting, right? But it goes further than that. For example, you need the bones in your ear to hear correctly. Those are small bones in there that allow you to have the proper hearing that we developed and everything. So evolutionarily speaking, bones have been used for a lot more than just supporting the structure, just the skeleton. It does way more than that. That's a bit the conversation we're starting to have about the heart, that it does way more than just beating. Same thing with the bone. So now they started to look, is the bone a feedback mechanism? Is it just like the skin is, is there a feedback mechanism through the bone? And there is one, which is the peptide hormone osteocalcin. So they started to look at it, and for example, they saw in the mice that did not have the adrenal glands that went through a stress response, what they saw was the level of osteocalcin had quadrupled under 2 minutes, showing that the osteocalcin was the responsible for the stress response and not the adrenaline in that case, for example. So where does noradrenaline fit in? So noradrenaline is a neurotransmitter a monoamine neurotransmitter for the sympathetic nervous system. But the hormone responsible for a feedback mechanism, the noradrenaline is produced in the brain. That's the one that directs the sympathetic nervous system. But the feedback mechanism happens through a peptide hormone that is produced through the bones. So that prediction observation is the same system that we see between the brain and the body. Then we're going to see it with the bones. The bone being the observation model, right? Being the one responsible for the sympathetic nervous system from the observation side of things. Peptide hormone act extremely fast. And that's osteocalcin. So when you see those papers, what you're going to see? You're going to see that the osteocalcin leads to so many things. So I have the entire list, but for example, you have enhanced osteocalcin production. So when you start pumping more osteocalcin at the basic level, you get an upregulation of testosterone production. That means that the more, and then we see it on dosage base. So that means that the more osteocalcin you pump, the more you push production of testosterone. So I would think that's a pretty important factor to consider when we talk about muscle building, energy levels. For men, we know that the high level of testosterone is very necessary. We know the damage that comes from low level of testosterone. So it seems that osteocalcin is a very important factor of that. Again, so just like adrenaline and cortisol, osteocalcin is also involved in the homeostasis of glucose, right? So that's going to be very, very important, which means the level of osteocalcin will stimulate gluconeogenesis, things like that. So there's going to be a humongous relationship between your level of glucose and your level of osteocalcin. For people with, for example, with obesity or diabetic people, osteocalcin is going to become a very, very important hormone. We're going to see that as well. It crosses the blood-brain barrier. That's an hormone that crosses the blood-brain barrier to bind to the brainstem, the midbrain, and the hippocampus. That's going to matter a lot because when it hooks to the midbrain, it hooks to what is called the ventral tegmental area, which is the area responsible for dopamine, for example. So that's going to matter a lot. It just happens that osteocalcin enhances, so makes the production of what is called monoamine neurotransmitters go up. Monoamine neurotransmitter means serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline, all those things. So it's actually an extremely important peptide hormone for about everything, really, if you look at the list. It inhibits GABA synthesis. That matters because people talk about GABA levels being high or low. Osteocalcin has a huge impact on that. It actually inhibits the synthesis. And yeah, they say prevents anxiety and depression. Yes and no. You have to understand how the anxiety and the depression was tested. I talked about this on the podcast. The way they test anxiety on mice is they see if the mouse wants to go into a brightly lit area. The mice don't like it because that means predators can get them. So whenever you put a mouse in a wide open area, it starts to freak out at first. We see it, they go in a corner and then they stop moving and then they start exploring very slowly the area. And if you put a bright light, that's even worse. So they were testing mice that had osteocalcin in high level versus mice that had no osteocalcin. They do that through genetic changes. And the mouse that did not have osteocalcin were very, very reluctant to go into the brightly lit area. So they were very fearful in that sense. That's what they refer to as anxiety. It's true technically and to a degree. That doesn't mean that you can qualify anxiety as only being a fearful behavior. But anyway, that's what their test for anxiety is. So it's a very specific thing. What you can see is a lack of fight out of those mice. That's really what you're going to get out of all of this. That osteocalcin is an indication of how much fight you have. Remember, testosterone goes up, and monoamine transmitters goes up. So what you're talking about is that the osteocalcin is a fight hormone. They actually call it a fitness hormone, interestingly, because it allows you to fight better. That's what the osteocalcin seems to be for. And so depression, what do they call depression? Same thing. They're going to hang a mouse by the tail, and then the longer it moves while being hanged, then the less depressed it is. I know it's a stupid way of thinking depression, but that's actually the way. By the way, all the antidepressants were tested at first and invented was like that. They were actually trying to drown mice. So they put them into a stuff where they can't get out, and they see how long it takes for the mouse to try to float and stop trying to get out. And the longer it fights without floating, the less depressed it is. So literally, they put antidepressant, what they call antidepressant, into those mice, and the one that fought the longest were that's the pill we want. That's literally how the SSRIs are. I'm just saying. It's not fucking stupid. Anyway, very interesting part, osteocalcin favors learning and memory. So you'll see that's fascinating. Why learning and memory? Because it helps you fight. Because in order to fight, you need to be able to learn from the fight, and memorization tells you what happened the last time so you can strategize better. So when we say the hormone of the fight is not just fight like energy-wise. It's actually learning to fight as well. It's very, very important. How did they do that? They saw it in mice always, where they had the easy stuff, where they had the pregnant mouse, right? That with kids that would have no osteocalcin, they would learn very, very slowly, right? Not correctly. But so they would pump osteocalcin into the pregnant mouse, right? And they would see that the progenitor, as they get adult, had better learning behavior and memory behavior. So just by pumping osteocalcin during the pregnancy, they could raise the level of learning and memory into those mice. So that was quite an important stuff. It favored neurogenesis in the mice. It's necessary to have an acute stress response in the sense of without it, we cannot see that response to stress. So it's there. What's interesting also is that in order to create osteocalcin, we need glutamate to get toward the osteoblast part of the bone in order to produce osteocalcin. Glutamate is the neurotransmitter you see that is the most common into the human body, and one that is called an excitatory neurotransmitter. Oh yeah, that's very interesting. In the brainstem, the osteocalcin, so crossing the blood-brain barrier, goes into the brainstem in the dorsal and medium RAF nuclei. RAF nuclei is very important because that's the part of the brain where we produce serotonin, but it's also the part of the brain responsible for the circadian rhythms. So that means that the osteocalcin and the circadian rhythms actually are related in that sense. So that's a major stuff. Like you guys heard me talk about circadian rhythms all the time. That is also a part of the equation, it seems, which is logical because during the day, if you're fighting, through the pounding of the bones, through the bone feeling what's happening, it would tell the system to stay active. So that's going to take a play. Again, we're going back to being a part of that sympathetic nervous system. And again, sympathetic and the day being related in the circadian rhythm. So, man, does that become important? So the treatment of osteocalcin during pregnancy had mild effects on anxiety and depression, the way it was tested, but erased deficit in learning and memory, as I was saying. So that means that in adult mice, right? So that means that during the pregnancy, when they put the osteocalcin, it did not help necessarily that much into depression and anxiety in adult mice, but it erased the deficit in learning and memory. So that means that osteocalcin during pregnancy is an extremely important thing. You can take it a little bit further. So does that mean when you see older people that start to lose bone mass, they lose cognition as well? But so now that becomes the thing, is do they lose cognition because they're old? Or do they lose cognition because they lost bone mass? Or is it a combination of both? It always is. But that shows you as well that losing bone mass can lead to loss of cognition. So that whole idea about older people, their brain going to shit, but that might be a reason why their brain go to shit. Maybe it's because physically they go to shit. So instead of thinking that as you get old, your brain decays, maybe it's because your body is decaying, that your brain is decaying. Or at least there's going to be a combination. So no matter what, exercise done correctly will help lose less cognition as we get older. So I would say that's a pretty big, important part. So, blah, 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 blah. Oh, yeah, right. That one, I love that one. Osteocalcin rose in rats that were restrained for more than 30 minutes. So at first, they were like, oh, I can't move. But eventually, when they started to get so pissed, so frustrated about it, the osteocalcin started to raise. We saw the same thing in humans in public speaking and cross-examination. Like at first it was okay, but as it started to get, more into the moment, we saw the osteocalcin rising. So it's not just when you have pure application onto the bone that the bone releases osteocalcin. It's any type of fight you're in, osteocalcin will pump in. So people will ask me, do I think public speaking is a type of a fight? If you're asking me that, it's because you've never done it. When you have done public speaking as much as I have, trust me, you would see it's a sympathetic reaction. Every single time at first, you feel attack. It takes a long time to get your nerves under control. Right, so osteocalcin is a signaling molecule in peripheral organs necessary for fight. And it also goes straight to the brain to influence the sympathetic nervous system. So, this one. So important. The osteocalcin, to promote the fight, what also does it do? It suppresses the parasympathetic tone. So it suppresses the vagal tone. So we know that the vagal tone can be used as a brake for the sympathetic nervous system. You freak out, vagal tone, nasal breathing in order to lower your sympathetic response. What the osteocalcin does is it suppresses the capacity of the vagal tone to do that so that the sympathetic raises even higher. So obviously, you could take that too far and giving yourself panic attacks and stuff like that, which would explain a lot like we talked on the podcast. But one of the main stuff of the osteocalcin is that it will allow us to limit the vagal tone so we can have a stronger fight mode, which I thought was very important. And you have to understand how far this goes. It goes straight to the parasympathetic neurons that produce acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter for the parasympathetic nervous system. Noradrenaline is a neurotransmitter for the sympathetic system, acetylcholine for the parasympathetic nervous system. The osteocalcin goes straight to the neurons so to stop acetylcholine to be produced so that it shuts down the parasympathetic nervous system, allowing you to go into fight mode. Just like the freeze mode inhibits the sympathetic, the osteocalcin inhibits the freeze mode so you can stay in fight. So that's such an important hormone. It's called inhibiting action potential of the parasympathetic neurons. Synthesis of acetylcholine as well and recycling of acetylcholine. So it stops the parasympathetic side. So it's a fascinating thing. And as I had this, he was showing that the osteocalcin was favoring the production of testosterone and also insulin production and secretion. So insulin resistant, or they can produce that's acetylcholine, will also be a help toward that. So I believe that osteocalcin, as we work more and more on it, will be shown to help obesity so much and diabetic people. So how do we get the production of osteocalcin up? So you're going to need the glutamate, obviously, not glutamine, glutamate, which is not the product, but the neurotransmitter to pump. So, but you can also see like the bone density is going to matter. So if you look at it from a fight mode perspective, what does that mean? That means that the bone is the observational feedback that the body has toward the fight mode. So that means that, let's say you're in the gym doing machines, right? You don't get the feedback from the bones that the fight is happening. So you will not be able to create a fight nearly as big that if you do an activity that has a direct impact on the bone. What do I mean by that? You could have the sprint, you could have kickboxing, right? Because obviously, the pounding either on the hands or on the feet, the tibula, the knees, the elbows, all that stuff. Grappling because you have pressure directly onto the bone. Sprinting. After that, you could see contact sports. There's a direct connection between the feedback from the bone and your level of fight, all the way up to your level of testosterone, to the level of your neurotransmitters, to your insulin production. Like osteocalcin is such an important hormone, and it is not produced only in terms of impact, and that's my guess, that's my opinion, not a fact, is that the more we put pressure on the bones, the better of an osteocalcin response we're going to get. That only makes sense to me. It is not the only way it's being released. It's being released in fight. But that means, to me, the way I see it is to get a greater fight, we need a stronger osteocalcin response. So that means we need a stronger response from the bones. So what does that mean? That means, like, for me right now, my training is 1 kickboxing a week, 2 actually, but 1 kickboxing a week for you guys, 1 grappling session, 1 sprint session. Why? Because it's a constant impact on the bone, which I believe will lead to profound metabolic changes in your body. So that's the importance of osteocalcin. I believe that it's a big one. Thank you, guys.